Imagine if the darkest chapter of World War II wasn't written in Berlin, but in boardrooms overlooking the skyline of New York. Imagine if the engines of fascism were quietly fueled not by blind ideology, but by American money, American technology, and American corporations that saw profit where others saw horror. History says the Nazis rose from chaos, driven by madness, driven by hate, driven by a fanatic dream of conquest. But what if I told you that the real power behind their rise wasn't only in the Reichstag, but on Wall Street, a place where suits, not uniforms, signed the deals that armed a dictator, a place where banks and corporations didn't just do business with Hitler. They built him, funded him, fueled him, and kept the money flowing, even after American soldiers were dying in Europe. And here's the part textbooks never whisper. Some of these companies ended the war richer than when it began. Stay with me, because by the time we're done, you'll understand exactly why this chapter was erased from classrooms, why the truth was buried under patriotic myths, and why the same corporations that profited from genocide still run your world today. Now let's step back to the year 1933. Hitler has just seized power. Germany lies in ruins. The economy shattered. The Treaty of Versailles choking the nation. Hyperinflation destroying life savings. 30% unemployment. Children starving. A currency worth less than paper. And in the middle of this devastation, Hitler promises to make Germany great again. But here's what nobody tells you. You can't build a war machine with speeches. You can't forge tanks out of ideology. You can't fly planes powered by anger. You need steel. You need oil. You need mountains of cash. And in 1933, Germany has none of these things. So where did Hitler get them? Picture this. Wall Street 1920s. American banks overflowing with cash. Eager to lend. Hungry for profit. Especially in Germany. A defeated nation drowning in reparations, but still seen as a golden opportunity. The Dawes Plan of 1924. J.P. Morgan. Dillon Reed. Chase National Bank. Restructuring German debt. Floating massive bonds. Locking Germany into dependence on American capital. Between 1924 and 1931, over $475 million flowed from the U.S. into Germany. That's more than $8 billion today. Not charity. Not goodwill. Loans with interest. Loans with conditions. Loans that gave American bankers direct influence over Germany's economy. And when Hitler took power, those banks didn't retreat. They doubled down. Here's where the story gets unbelievable. Because while the world saw Hitler as a madman, Wall Street saw him as a client. And nothing reveals this more than Standard Oil owned by the Rockefellers. One of the most powerful corporate empires on earth, made a deal with IG Farben. IG Farben, the German chemical giant. The same company that would later produce Zyklon B, the gas that filled the chambers of Auschwitz. But this partnership wasn't just chemicals. It wasn't just business. It was fuel, the very lifeblood of war. Germany had no oil, none. No colonies, no foreign fields, no way to sustain a modern military. So how did the Luftwaffe roar across Europe? How did panzer tanks blitz through nations? Standard Oil handed Germany the key, synthetic fuel technology. The hydrogenation process. A method to create fuel from coal. Without it, Hitler's army would have stalled in 6 months. No invasions, no blitzkrieg, no war as we know it. And Standard Oil knew exactly what they were enabling. They had representatives in Germany. They received reports. They understood the consequences. Yet the partnership continued. After 1939, after Poland. Even after war was declared. Let that sink in. An American corporation that later became Exxon helped build the fuel that powered Hitler's war machine. And this is only the beginning, because the next company didn't just fuel the war, they organized the genocide, IBM. Yes, the computer company. The company behind modern data. Back then, their punch card machines weren't just tools. They were the skeleton of Nazi bureaucracy. IBM didn't simply sell equipment. They customized it, tailored it, perfected it, to track Jews, track transports, track prisoner numbers, track labor assignments, track death counts. Every concentration camp had IBM machines humming in the background. Data in Lives Out, Dahomey, IBM's German subsidiary, kept the machines running, sent technicians, updated systems. An IBM headquarters in New York collected royalties the entire time. Every punch card sold, every machine leased, every record processed, IBM got paid. An American corporation profited by making mass murder efficient, and when the war ended, no prosecution, no trials, no consequences. IBM walked away clean and became one of the biggest tech companies in the world.
But if IBM built the machinery of genocide, Ford built the wheels of the Nazi war machine. Henry Ford wasn't just a businessman. He was an openly raging anti-Semite. He published a newspaper, the Dearborn Independent, spreading conspiracies that blamed Jews for every world problem. He pushed the protocols of the Elders of Zion, a hoax that fueled hatred across continents. Hitler adored him, kept Ford's portrait on his desk, called him an inspiration, and Ford's German factories' Ford work didn't slow down when the war started. They accelerated, building trucks for the Wehrmacht, building engines for military vehicles, using slave labor torn from concentration camps. By 1941, after America officially entered the war, Ford work was labeled a critical military contractor by the Nazi government, and what came next is almost unbelievable. After the war, Ford demanded compensation. Yes, compensation for the Allied bombing damage to his German factories, the same factories building Nazi trucks. He wanted American taxpayers to pay him for hitting plants that were supplying Hitler. The audacity is staggering, but Ford wasn't alone. General Motors was right there with him. GM owned Opel, the largest truck manufacturer in Germany. Opel produced half of all German trucks and a third of all armored vehicles. The Blitzkrieg that smashed Poland, the Blitzkrieg that tore through France, rolled forward on General Motors' wheels. GM executives kept control the entire time, even after Pearl Harbor, even after American sons were dying in Europe. They claimed, "We can't control foreign subsidiaries." Translation, "We're making too much money to stop." And after the war, GM sued the US government too. They demanded $33 million for bomb damage to their German facilities, and they won. They actually got paid. Imagine that, factories building Nazi war machines, paid for by American taxpayers. After the war, they helped fuel.
But the list of collaborators didn't end with cars, fuel, and machines. It reached straight into the vaults of America's biggest banks. Chase National Bank, known today as J.P. Morgan Chase, played a role so cold it still chills the blood. In 1940, when Nazi boots marched into Paris, Chase's Paris branch didn't resist. It didn't hesitate. It cooperated. They froze Jewish accounts. They helped the Nazis seize assets. They stripped wealth from families who were hours away from being deported to camps. And Chase didn't stop operating. Not in 1941, not after Pearl Harbor, not as American soldiers were dying in Europe. They stayed in business in Nazi-occupied France until 1944. Documents uncovered in the 1990s revealed the truth. Executives knew exactly what they were doing. They received reports, they made decisions, and they kept going because it was profitable. But they weren't alone. DuPont supplied chemicals to Germany. Union Banking Corporation, run by Prescott Bush, grandfather of a future president, managed Nazi assets and financed steel production. ITT Corporation sold communications systems directly to the German military. Their representatives negotiated with Nazi officials throughout the war. These weren't rogue employees. They weren't isolated deals. These were boardroom decisions. Approved by executives, authorized by shareholders, protected by silence. And for years, the US government looked the other way. Until public outrage grew too loud to ignore, but by then, the damage was done. And the profits were already in American bank accounts. Now it's time to talk numbers, because the scale is almost impossible to imagine. IG Farben alone used over 80,000 slave laborers from Auschwitz, worked them until they collapsed, producing synthetic rubber and fuel, and IBM's machines tracked every single one. Ford Work produced 78,000 trucks for the Wehrmacht. Opel produced 29,000. Together, they supplied more than a third of the entire German military's logistics fleet. Without those American-built trucks, the Nazis don't conquer France. They don't surround Leningrad. They don't push toward Moscow. They don't transport millions to extermination camps. The Holocaust wasn't just ideological, it was industrial. And American corporations provided the industry. And here's the part that should make your blood boil. After the war ended, after the camps were liberated, after the world saw the mountains of shoes, the piles of bodies, the ashes of entire families, almost none of these companies were held accountable, not truly, not meaningfully. There were trials, i.e.s. the Nuremberg industrialist trials targeting executives from IG Farben and Krupp. But the American corporations? The banks? The tech firms? They walked away, because the United States needed them. The Marshall Plan required factories to rebuild Europe. The Cold War required manufacturing power to challenge the Soviet Union. So Ford received government contracts, GM received subsidies. IBM helped build American infrastructure. The files documenting their involvement? Sealed, classified, buried, and it stayed that way for half a century. Until the 1990s, when survivors filed lawsuits, forcing disclosures that shook the world. Letters, memos, contracts, financial statements. Proof, undeniable proof, that executives knew what they were supporting. They knew about the slave labor. They knew about the camps. They knew their machines, their fuel, their trucks, their chemicals were part of the machinery of genocide. And the settlements? Pathetic. In 2000, German industry created a $5 billion fund for slave labor survivors. Ford and GM together contributed just $20 million. Pocket change compared to the billions they earned. IBM paid nothing publicly, denied any wrongdoing for decades. And when they finally settled 70 years after the war, it was private, sealed, with no admission of fault, silence bought, responsibility erased. And here's the twisted truth. This wasn't a one-time event. It wasn't a unique moral failure locked in the past. It was a pattern. A pattern that repeats whenever corporations discover that evil is profitable and accountability is optional. Because if you think this kind of collaboration died in 1945, it didn't. It simply changed its flag, its language, its geography. Today, American corporations still operate inside authoritarian regimes and still profit from suffering hidden behind polished PR statements. Look at China, Apple, Nike, Tesla, all manufacturing in Xinjiang, a region where Uyghur Muslims are imprisoned in camps, stripped of culture, forced into labor, monitored by state surveillance every hour of every day. The U.S. State Department officially calls it genocide, and what do American companies do? They lobby against sanctions. They insist that supply chains are too complex. They claim they can't verify whether forced labor is being used. It's the same script as the 1930s. Back then, we cannot control our foreign subsidiaries. Today, our supply chains are complicated. Different wording. Same excuse. Same profit motive. Apple made $365 billion in revenue last year. A massive slice of that comes from manufacturing tied to forced labor. And every time Congress tries to regulate it, Apple fights back, quietly, strategically, forcefully. Google developed a censored search engine for the Chinese government, code name Dragonfly. It would have erased Tiananmen Square from search results, hidden human rights abuses, filtered truth for over 1 billion people. Employees revolted and the project was shelved. But the message was clear. Access to China's market was worth more than moral clarity. Facebook wasn't any better. Its algorithms were used to organize genocide in Myanmar. The Rohingya massacre, over 25,000 dead, was coordinated through Facebook posts. The company apologized, promised to improve moderation. But they kept operating in Myanmar because shutting down meant losing users, losing ad revenue, and revenue always wins. Oil companies still work with Saudi Arabia, despite the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, despite the devastation in Yemen. Arms manufacturers sell to dictatorships like it's business as usual. Cisco helped build China's Great Firewall. Oracle sells software used to track dissidents. It's not identical to the 1930s, but the moral calculation is the same. Profit over principles. Every single time. And here's the harsh truth few people ever say aloud. Because it shatters the comforting myths we're raised to believe. Corporations don't have morals. They have shareholders. They don't have ethics. They have quarterly earnings. They don't have conscience. They have stock prices. If doing business with a genocidal regime is legal and profitable, they will do it. And executives will justify it. With the same lines recycled across a century. We're creating jobs. We can't compete if we don't. It's complicated. And while they say this, they donate to charities, sponsor museums, fund scholarships, name buildings after themselves. They polished their reputation with one hand, while aiding atrocities with the other. It's the same duality that defined the 1930s. You can build hospitals with one hand and gas chambers with the other. As long as the hospital is visible and the gas chamber is hidden, history remembers you as a hero. That's the game, and it's been perfected. So what do you do with this knowledge? First, you understand that World War II wasn't just soldiers and bombs. It was a financial operation. American banks restructured German debt. American corporations built German trucks, German planes, German fuel. American technology tracked Jewish victims in concentration camps. Without Wall Street, Hitler doesn't rebuild. Without Ford and GM, the Wehrmacht doesn't roll. Without IBM, the Holocaust isn't industrialized. These companies didn't wear swastikas, but they enabled everything for profit. Second, accept that accountability in this world is a myth. Most executives died wealthy. Most corporations paid pennies in settlements decades later, and today, they're richer than ever. The pattern continues because consequences don't exist. Third, look at the world around you. Because the truth is, you're already part of this story. The iPhone in your pocket might be assembled by Uyghur labor inside a detention camp. Those Nike shoes may trace back to factories built on surveillance and coercion. That Tesla might rely on supply chains linked to companies that collaborate with Chinese state security. Your dollars, your purchases, your convenience fund these systems not intentionally, not maliciously, but silently, effortlessly, automatically, and corporations count on that. They count on you not wanting to dig deeper, not wanting to change habits, not wanting to confront what lies beneath the surface, because as long as the consumer stays quiet, the machine keeps spinning. Fourth, understand this isn't a conspiracy. It's documented. It's public. It's proven. Congressional investigations, declassified files, lawsuits, corporate archives. The evidence exists, but it rarely reaches classrooms, textbooks, or media narratives. Why? Because the same corporations that shaped the past still shape the present. They lobby governments. They sponsor universities. They fund news networks. They influence culture. And they decide what parts of history are convenient to remember and what parts are better left buried. If this story is making you angry, good. If it's making you rethink everything you were taught, even better. Because this story doesn't end in 1945. It never ended. It just changed costume, changed geography, changed technology. But the play is the same. Profit over people. Influence over truth. Silence over justice. And unless people understand this, unless they speak up, unless they demand transparency, the cycle will continue. Different countries, different victims, different excuses. Same motive. So if you're still watching, if you've made it this far, then you're already different from most people. Most never question the sanitized version of history they were handed in school. Most never look past the patriotic gloss painted over uncomfortable truths. Most never ask who really funded the wars, who really built the weapons, who really profited while the world burned. But you did. You stayed. You followed the trail. And now you see how deep it goes. History isn't just a story about heroes and villains. It's a story about power, about money, about decisions made in private rooms that reshape entire continents. World War II wasn't just fought on the front lines, it was financed in American boardrooms. And today's world, the one you live in, is still shaped by the same families, the same corporations, the same bloodlines that helped build Hitler's war machine. They didn't disappear. They didn't fall from power. They rebranded. They expanded. They diversified. And while the world moved on, they kept playing the same game. Different era. Different enemies. Different justifications. Same playbook. Because history isn't over. It never was. It just hides better now. Behind technology. Behind PR. Behind layers of corporate language designed to keep you uninformed and uninvolved. But you're not uninvolved anymore. Not after hearing this. The next time you buy a product, the next time you admire a brand, the next time you trust a corporation, you'll remember this story. You'll remember that even the companies you interact with every day have shadows behind them, and that those shadows stretch far back, all the way to the darkest days of the 20th century. So before we end, let me leave you with one truth most people never dare to confront. History doesn't repeat because people forget. History repeats because the systems that caused it were never dismantled. The corporations that armed Hitler, that fueled his tanks, that tracked his victims, still exist. Their names changed, their logos changed, their branding improved, but their priorities didn't. They still chase profit above principles. They still influence governments behind the scenes. They still fund political campaigns, shape legislation, and steer global policy to protect their interests. And the world lets them, because they've mastered the art of distraction. Give people entertainment. Give people convenience. Give people new phones, new shoes, new gadgets, new addictions. And while the world is looking there, they operate here, quiet, calculated, untouchable. The past isn't dead. It's not even past. It's alive in the companies that shape your future. It's alive in the supply chains that cross borders and ideologies. It's alive in the silence of governments that refuse to challenge the corporations funding them. And unless people stay alert, unless people stay skeptical, unless people question everything, the next chapter of this story will be written the same way as the last one. In shadows, in secrecy, in boardrooms, by the same kinds of men who once shook hands with Hitler himself. So if this video opened your eyes, if it made you question the history you learned, then don't look away now. Smash the like button if you're done with the sanitized version of the past. Subscribe because the truth doesn't stop here. And comment below which modern corporation you believe is playing the same game today, because I promise you, you're funding something you'd hate if you knew the whole truth. Thanks for watching. Stay aware, stay skeptical. History isn't over. It's just hiding better, and the same families that once profited from Hitler are still shaping your world today.